and admit that we're not going to get that outcome, that it is inflation, maybe even hyperinflation, and you better be prepared, right? Don't prepare for the dollar going up. There's no way that's happening. The dollar is going to collapse, and I don't care about the arguments about this milkshake theory or the dollar is the cleanest dirty shirt in the hamper. It's not. It's the dirtiest shirt in that hamper. Before I go, and I'm going to start taking some questions and on this live stream, I wish I could actually see the questions, the chat going through. I don't know how I can. Maybe Paul can tell me how to find that so I can see all the chat and everything. Because right now I don't see anything. I'm still stuck on the last one that we turned off. But my dad, I've been selling this book. I'm actually surprised that I still have copies of this book left. This book is The Kingdom of Malts. And I'll give you guys the story on this book. So my father wrote a book called The Biggest Con. And I wish I still had copies. I don't. You can find them online. I don't have any extra copies. I have a few copies, but I want to keep those for myself. But that book was published, my dad's book, The Biggest Con. The initial title of that book was The U.S. Government, Public Enemy Number One. And the reason my dad called the U.S. government public enemy number one is when he wrote that book, Gerald Ford was president. And he declared inflation public enemy number one back in the 1970s. Public enemy number one. And since my father knew that the government caused inflation, if inflation was public enemy number one, well, then the government was public enemy number one because the government caused the inflation. But Random House didn't like that title. And so they came up with a title called The Biggest Con. Now, part of the original Biggest Con was this book, this little story. That's also where How an Economy Grows and Why it Doesn't, which I turned into my own version, How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes, which I will be updating at some point. I think I'm going to wait till Trump finishes the first term, and then I'm going to update that classic of that book. But my dad wrote, there were two fiction stories in The Biggest Con. One of them, the publishers left in. This other one, The Kingdom of Malts, they cut out. Now, my dad started his own publishing company called Freedom Books. And the first book he published was this one. And my brother and I used to joke because we said, Dad, why is it Freedom Books? You got one book. It should be called Freedom Book. But, he was looking, into the future and he was optimistic. So he called it Freedom Books, even though he only had one book. And this was the first one. And it originally sold for $2.50, The Kingdom of Malts. It's a fantastic little book, wonderfully illustrated by a guy named Andy Ice. So my dad sold a bunch of copies of this book, and he ran out, and in 2000, he reprinted the book and sold it for $10. And then these were the last copies. And up until I discovered several cases of these books in a warehouse, after my father passed, I went and looked through the stuff, and there was a bunch of these books. And at the time, they were selling you, if you wanted to buy one of these books, they were there. You can go to eBay or Amazon. They were selling for like $200 a copy, some more. So people really want them. But I had them. I sell them now, and I still have books. I mean, I'm going to run out, certainly probably by the end of this year. I doubt I'll have them left. But, it's taken longer to sell them than I thought. But, and the market's still not bad. I mean, if you go on Amazon or eBay, they're not $200 a copy anymore, but they're more than I'm selling them for. But these are brand new. They've never been opened before, and I autographed them all. So they're not autographed by my dad. But the reason I really like this book is it really explains in a simple way inflation. And people need to understand inflation because we are headed for massive inflation. And, it's already higher than what the government admits because the CPI is reverse engineered, right? They changed the methodology for calculating the CPI back in the 1990s, the Boskin Commission. See, the government said that they thought that the CPI was overstating inflation, and so they fixed it. Yeah, they fixed it like the mafia fixes things. The fix is in when it comes to the CPI. So the CPI, by design, understates inflation. Then the economists and the Federal Reserve can look at this rigged CPI and claim there's not enough inflation, we need more. Right? So a lot of people will say, Peter Schiff, you were wrong. You said there'd be inflation. There is inflation. Right? The government is just hiding it. But yes, it's not as bad as I said it would be. but it will be. In fact, it's going to be worse than I said it would be. And in fact, a lot of the inflation is in the stock market and the bond market. And you know, a lot of people too, and they want to criticize me because they said, hey, Peter, you said there'd be inflation and it hasn't happened. Yeah, but what did the Federal Reserve say? There was no housing bubble in 2007, 2008. Ben Bernanke, Janet Yellen, there's nothing to worry about. There's no housing bubble. Even if housing prices come down, it's not going to hurt the economy. They could not have been more wrong. Yet everybody wants to give them a pass, right? Everybody wants to focus on my prediction of inflation. Oh, Peter Schiff, you're wrong. We haven't had inflation, and they want to listen to the Fed. Well, look how wrong the Fed was about the financial crisis. I nailed that crisis. I saw that coming from a mile away. No one at the Fed saw it, or at least if they saw it, they weren't honest about it. They didn't admit it to anybody. So who knows? Either they're incompetent or they lie. But either way, you can't trust them. But anyway, so let me go and now look at the questions. So number one, I'm looking, I got to take a little drink of water. I still can't see the live stream, but I have somebody sending me some of the top questions. First one is I'm going to do is coming from Bree. Can you explain where all the QE and 0% inflation is hiding? It should have hit consumer prices by now, I would think. Well, it has. As I said, consumer prices are rising. It's just that the CPI doesn't really pick up the increase. You know, I did a study on this. In fact, there's a YouTube video I forget I made a few years ago in which I went over the CPI and how crazy it is. But one of the things I remember particularly that I did is it was, I think, in 2013 when I did this. And I looked at the government's CPI. And one of the categories they had there was newspapers and magazines. And the government claimed that over the 10 years from 2002 to 2013, that the price of newspapers and magazines had gone up by 30%. And so maybe about 3% a year. Well, that's easy to check because newspapers and magazines, they write the price right on the cover. So I went back using the internet and I took like the top 20 newspapers and magazines, Time, Newsweek, Life, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, you know, big newspapers and magazines. And I looked at what the price was in 2003. And then I looked at the price in 2013. And the average increase was not 30%, it was 130%. So somehow the CPI took a 130% increase in prices and hedonically adjusted it down to just 30%. So this is what we're dealing with. We're not getting honest numbers. You know, expecting the government to put out honest statistics on inflation is like expecting the mafia to give out honest statistics about crime. Right? They're not going to do it. But the other part of your question is, where is the inflation hiding? Take a look at the stock market. Take a look at the real estate market, the bond market. Look at rare art. Look at collectible cars. I mean, all sorts of things have gone way up. That's inflation. Asset prices are prices. You know, stocks are not up because of earnings being up. They're up just because there's more money bidding the prices up. So the inflation is there. It's hiding in places that people like. Everybody likes inflation when it makes them richer. The problem is it eventually makes everybody poorer, and that's when people don't like it. Anyway, let me go to the next question from Colby Callahan. I want to own a home and have been waiting for the price crash for a few years. Can restricted supply keep prices high even though the next crash? I live in San Jose. Well, I know the way to San Jose. And if you're looking for the optimal buy on real estate, I would wait. I think prices in terms of gold are going to come down. Whether they come down in terms of dollar bills, paper money, is a different story. We don't know. I think they will, but I think the drop will be dramatic. I think California real estate could lose 80 to 90% of its value in terms of gold, maybe more. So I would take the money that I would have otherwise put as a down payment for a property and invest it maybe in gold or silver stocks, physical gold, or just get out of the dollar even, and wait for a more opportune time to buy if you really want to buy in Southern California. But California has a lot of problems that I think are going to make the real estate crash in that state particularly brutal. So, if you're concerned about not overpaying, I wouldn't buy. I mean, the only way people will make money on real estate